Hey, Sig. All right, so it's time, so I guess I'll get started. I just want to be clear today that I'm not going to be presenting an argument in this debate explicitly defending the current American minimum wage. Instead, I'm going to be presenting arguments that demonstrate that in principle, government should set standard minimum wages. My argument is going to consist of two lines of reasoning. The first line of reasoning that I'm going to use would be arguing that the governments have a responsibility to protect the lives and livelihood of their population. I will seek to demonstrate how this applies to the minimum wage in two ways. The government should have a responsibility to ensure that an individual's labor is not undervalued, and when the governments have a responsibility to ensure that a population is fed, housed, and clothed, while at the same time seeking to minimize that government's financial burden upon the state. My second line of reasoning is going to seek to demonstrate that alternatives to the standardized minimum wage that try to implement some sort of free market model fail from the start, as it is impossible for governments to remain silent while their population is treated as a simple commodity. I will do this in two ways. I will argue that governments, in carrying out their duty of protection, must ensure that the population is treated equally as possible. And then I will argue that governments must ensure that no matter how the population, the government must ensure that no members of their population should be significantly devalued or valued at zero, both possibilities within the free market. If anyone judging the debate or watching it agrees with any of my four arguments here, then they would agree that the government should then set the standard minimum wage. So I'm going to go into more in depth when I come back. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic.
Okay, so I'll start with some resolutional analysis and judging criteria. So for resolutional analysis, let's talk about governments, plural, indicating a preference for universal adoption, not specific to any one government. And the word standard, I think, is important. The word strongly indicates a minimum wage of the same or very similar across the board. It would be typified by the calls for the $15 national minimum wage in the US, that sort of thing. Minimum wages only make sense under market conditions, so we should limit our discussion to that context, market economies and such. Judging, I propose that we look at goals and means analysis. This means a standard of judging, the means of attempting to do a standard minimum wage is the best way to meet our goals. I propose these balanced goals: to reduce personal poverty, to encourage overall economic prosperity, and to encourage economic justice. I think that's pretty in line with what my opponent has proposed so far. So at the end of the debate, if you think that government implemented standard minimum wage is the best way to forward these goals, then you should vote pro. If you think there is a better way to achieve these goals, then you should vote con. Does that sound fair?
Sounds fair, yeah. Oh, it's for me. Okay, let me go ahead and clarify. If you're good, I'm going to clarify my two lines of reasoning, and then we can go from there. First, I want to clarify the fact that governments are responsible to protect the lives and livelihood of their population. So, one, governments are responsible for ensuring that their population is not cheated or stolen from. This is understood to be true because no one argues that government should not pass laws concerning theft, or at least most people don't. By setting a standardized minimum wage, the government is explicitly saying that to pay an individual less than minimum wage is theft. If it is fair to reason that a government can assign a standard minimum value to an hour of labor, and it is fair to assume that, and it is indeed only the government that has the resources and information to divine such a value, and to do so objectively. Now, that's important to be able to do so objectively. Number two, in my first line of reasoning argument, is that while there's still much debate on just who and how much government should help, on how much government should help individuals with their basic needs, the fact of the matter is that governments do provide help to meet basic needs for just about every individual. In order to minimize the cost for the government while ensuring that everyone has their basic needs met, it is the responsibility of the government to assign a minimum hourly wage to anyone who has found employment. This minimum wage would, in theory, be enough to meet the basic needs of the individual that is working, and in the cases where it does not meet the minimum for the basic needs, it does minimize the amount that the government has to spend or to meet those basic needs of the individual. So, second line of reasoning, alternatives to the standardized minimum wage treat labor as a commodity. This ignores the fact that those that are producing labor are human beings. It is the responsibility of the governments to ensure that human beings are not valued differently for the same production of labor simply as a result of geographical location or family history. One of the ways to eliminate such potential for discrimination is a standardized minimum wage. Second, within the free market, commodities can be devalued to such an extent that they are considered worthless. Governments cannot allow for any portion of their population to be considered by individuals to be worthless. In order to do this and to keep individuals from being considered worthless, they can do this by assigning a value to their labor, no matter what job they're doing, and they can assign a minimum value, and that minimum value would be the standardized minimum wage. If there's any questions on or clarifications needed, just address them, and I'll do my best to reach them. I'm going to pass the mic back to you.
Okay, so I want to talk about some of the problems with minimum wage. We don't generally dispute pros' aspirations, and so we seem to agree on those, but let's discuss the problems. First of all, standards are bad. Because the cost of living vary wildly from place to place and from country to country, even within the same state, any standard is likely to be too high for some markets, creating unemployment, or too low for others, failing to meet a minimum living wage. So the idea of a standard, which is implicit in the resolution, goes against the need for different regions and different places to have different values for the baseline for labor. It also becomes problematic during rapid economic expansion or during economic depression. The standard resists changes, especially when they're localized. Unemployment and inflation are often regional or local phenomena. It's far better to have a flexible, non-standard economic policies that are based on local or current conditions that are designed with flexibility in mind. Number two, it can create unemployment and thus greater poverty. When minimum wage is set in a market economy, any job that has lower skill value than the minimum wage is removed from the economy. This means that people whose labor value is low, say people who are disabled in some way or unskilled, untrained, perhaps they're just kind of lazy or they're irritating, they become effectively unemployable because their labor cannot rise to the market value of what they can produce. This leads to unemployment. Adding to this, automation becomes economically more advantageous for low-skill positions, which impacted by minimum wage, which means more people out of work. Finally, foreign wage competition is likewise more likely to replace domestic workers when there are artificial wage floors. The end result is greater poverty for those who are not able to contribute at the new wage floor. Three, overall economic disadvantages. Any distortion in optimal price points leads to economic inefficiencies, and those lead to lower overall productivity and value generation in the economy. This is a core principle behind market economics. If you think that markets create wealth, then you should oppose market interference of this kind. Number four, less economic justice. If you're taking away a right of people to make their own negotiations and determine their own worth of labor, both employers and employees should be free to determine their own worth and willingness to work and to negotiate in fair practice on an agreed upon price. It also addresses the negotiating and only addresses the negotiating inequality of the very poorest and working class, ignoring everyone else in the middle class and upper lower class. This is in contrary to your attempt to create fair value for work in both the cases. As far as quick rebuttals to some of your points, as I said, you want to avoid people having their labor be worthless, but you're actually creating a larger portion of the population who's deemed to have no value whatsoever. It becomes zero for their labor rather than the value that the market decides is fair compensation to the value that they work.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me go ahead and just address all the points that you missed. If I skipped one, please let me know so I can address it here. I want to begin with your idea that standards are bad. Now, why in principle that I agree that setting an upper standard is bad, I don't see how you can set a minimum standard is bad. No one would argue that a minimum standard of safety is bad in any case. So minimum standards are not bad, where there might, if you were to put it on the other end and say maximum standards would be bad, you can make that argument. I don't feel that minimum standards are bad. Human beings have a minimum set of needs, and those are just simply fact of the matter because we are human beings. So if we have a minimum standard or a minimum set of needs that we met, sorry about that. I hit the button with my keyboard somehow. Okay, you said here that standards resist change. I would not say the minimum wage or any minimum standard is going to resist change. Change takes place because you're just setting a bottom floor. The standard is adapted to the economy. Now, it's been adapted slowly in the United States, but that's not necessarily the case that it must be adapted slowly. Standards can adapt with whatever speed that we choose to do that, and whatever speed is necessary. So just because historically standards have resisted change, that is not necessarily set in stone that they resist change. I want to get a little bit deeper into your idea that because some individuals will be priced out of labor, that certain individuals won't be able to be employed because their labor is going to be deemed invaluable. We have those cases already where individuals are not unemployable or not employable at the same rate. We already make compensations for those, so those things exist. So having a minimum standard wage, which we already do here in the United States, and a lot of other governments do as well, those individuals still exist. So that's just because they exist does not mean that they have caused a problem so far in our society. And so to say that there are people that are unemployable, yes, this is granted. The government is trying to limit its cost to the people that are employable. So if people are employable and they have some minimum wage, it's going to minimize the need that the government has to spend in order to meet their minimum basic needs. So I accept that there are people that are going to be unemployable, but that exists in every case, that are going to be unemployable, and that exists in every case. You argued that setting standard minimum wage would increase automation or foreign wage competition. Now, I believe that automation is going to come, as with every new technology. There's always the idea that automation is going to impact labor of the population. That just simply hasn't been the case. People find other means to work. More work comes in. So the idea that automation is going to be affected by the standard minimum wage is simply false. It hasn't been affected. It has not been the case so far. And if the technology comes advanced enough that it becomes a problem, then the minimum wage will have no impact on whether or not it's going to be adopted into the economy. It'll simply be adopted as soon as it becomes financially viable. So finally, let's say less economic justice, where we have this idea that negotiations between employer and employee, even with a minimum wage that exists now, we have groups, unions that exist. So the idea that a standard minimum wage lowers economic justice.
Okay, so I'll get back to those rebuttals in a moment. And the two further points that I made would be overall economic disadvantage and less economic justice because of free association and price choice. But let me move on to what the better options are, because I said if you want to vote pro, you have to say that this is the best way forward. But let me tell you some better ways forward. Number one, universal basic income. In UBI, the government uses tax revenue to guarantee every citizen a monthly wage that is sufficient to cover or nearly cover basic expenses in the area they live. This is provided without a means test. People then can freely work at any wage level that is worth their time without the pressure to work or starve. This evens out negotiation ground, ensures basic needs are met, and does so without distorting market conditions. It still allows people the freedom to choose whatever kind of work they feel is best available to them, or in some cases to not work at all, but everyone gets their basic needs met. So everybody can find employment, no matter how weak your skills are. You can still find meaningful work and know that you're supporting yourself with your actions. So it also eliminates many complicated and costly welfare systems, saving the government money. So I think it is a better system. Another better system would be national union representation. This is used commonly in Europe. National unions are empowered to negotiate wage floors and ranges for all workers in the industries those unions represent. The unions negotiate with representatives from private industry, and the state enforces the standards that they're agreed to. This puts all workers, not just the poorest, on even negotiation footing with company owners. It also ensures that all the benefits of union representation for nearly all the people in the economy. It allows for flexible pricing based on economic trends because it's renegotiated periodically, and it has many other advantages. It's just a much smarter, more specific way to address the needs of the underlying problem, and it helps a larger number of people. And finally, we have free markets. If you believe in the power of free markets, which have driven the world economy to new heights, creating record low levels of world poverty, and the advancement of human civilization, then you should be against blanket and clumsy market interferences like the standard minimum wage. So I think we have three different options you can take depending on how you feel society should work. Universal basic income, if you feel that everybody has a basic right to their basic needs being met, but you don't want to distort the economy. National union representation, if you want to even the market playing field between labor and business, and to help everybody in the economy, not just the people at the bottom. And free markets, if you generally think and believe that free markets are the best and come up with the best economic solutions to problems, then we should trust the free markets to go forward. If you think any of these is a better alternative than a standard minimum wage, then you should vote con in today's debate.
Okay, I appreciate you introducing some sort of alternatives. Now, I was hoping you would insert an alternative that isn't just a glorified version of the standard minimum wage, and you did finally with the free market system. But I want to address my point and what I mean by that with universal basic income. So basically with universal basic income, you're giving everyone, regardless of their labor, a standard minimum wage for just being part of the economy, so or just being part of the population. So basically, instead of businesses paying a standard minimum wage, the government gives everyone a standard minimum wage to live and to be be a productive part of their society. So the government says, you're now working for us to simply exist and be part and vote and do all the things that normal populations do. We're now paying you a standard wage. If you want to call it the universal basic income, to me, it's just being set by the government, and it's just all going to be basically standardized across every individual. So I don't see there's a big difference between us standardized, except it's just it's just burden. It's burden. The government has a burden on it as opposed to having the businesses. So this is going to cause an increase in spending by the government, which is not going to be backed up by. Is not going to be. It's going to cost the government more than just having the businesses pay those individuals that are working for them. When you have national union competition with state enforced standards. So to me, it seems that if you have a state enforced standard, what you're implying is that the state would enforce a minimum set of wages, say a minimum wage that the particular unions could negotiate for. So if you have a national union that is then subject to a state standard where they cannot negotiate for wages below a certain point, I don't see how that is significantly different than setting a standard minimum wage. And finally, of course, I've already mentioned that I think the free market treats individuals as commodities, and if we do that, then there's going to be certain individuals with certain skill sets that can be devalued into being worthless within the society, which the government has to prevent. So basically, so far, you've provided alternatives that I would say are just a different way of applying standard minimum wage. One puts the significantly higher financial burden on the government, which would be the universal basic income. And the second is just having, instead of just blanket saying, here's a standard minimum wage, it's just telling each individual union that you cannot negotiate for wages below a certain point. So you're going to set a minimum standard in any case of what the individual has. So if you're going to set a minimum standard, then I don't say that's significantly different.
I think these proposals are significantly different. Universal basic income, obviously, as you say, it would cost the government more. It would be a larger government budget, which is a significant change in and of itself. It doesn't impose any requirements on private contracts. So if you're a company under the minimum wage that says, look, if you want to hire somebody to sweep the floor, you've got to pay, say, $15 an hour. Now, if sweeping the floor is not worth $15 an hour to your business, maybe you buy one of those Roomba things and that ends up being cheaper, it changes your ability to negotiate with somebody. And it changes a worker who, say, is willing to work for $13 an hour, that's enough for them. They cannot choose to work at that rate. That's a problem for them. So universal basic income removes all that. People can contract at any price they like, anything they feel their time is worth, and same with companies, but nobody has to worry about the basic needs of life being met. You've got enough money to buy food, and for cheap rent, maybe you have to share, under the UBI or something, but basically you have enough money to sustain the minimums of your life. And so you're not under the gun from a company to work or die. Right. So it's a big change in the way it works, is where minimum wage leaves a lot of people on the table. If you cannot get a minimum wage job, you've got nothing. right? You're just going to starve. So this covers everybody. It is better at protecting the goals that you have, but it doesn't have all the economic disadvantages because it doesn't interfere with market negotiations. So it's really significantly different kind of a plan. Yes, it costs more, but you make taxes in order to pay for it. Obviously, you would have to have some fairly high taxes on the high end of the economy. Hopefully, you're going to tax all that automation, all the robotic factories and things like that that are generating all this wealth, and you can move that down towards the bottom, so everybody has a basic means of survival now that we have this more automated society. I want to respond to the automation thing. Robots and artificial intelligence are very new, and they're very powerful technologies. They're going to dramatically change the way our world works. Artificial intelligence chess programs can beat any human. Artificial intelligence programs can make art. They're starting to be able to create lifelike personalities that people have difficulty discerning. They can work as kiosk workers, telephone workers, respond intelligently to human conversation. That is all coming really soon, and they're going to be able to drive cars and do a lot of things that people do that was never been able to do in an automated way before. It's a revolution. It's coming. We need to be prepared for it. National unions are significantly different because it's flexible. It's not a standard, and it's not a minimum wage for just like anybody in the economy. They look at each industry and each kind of profession. Say if you're a teller clerk or if you're an astronautical engineer or whatever it is, they negotiate for those types of work and that kind of a salary to get a fair wage for that type of work that meets the market demand. And they have to negotiate with the companies in order to do it. It's not just some blanket government fiat. And that's a really important distinction because it creates an actual economic and market interaction, but it does so on a level playing field where the workers aren't disadvantaged as they are in the individual markets.
Okay, to touch back on universal basic incomes, where you said that workers can contract at any price. So to me, it seems that you're making the argument that individuals will have to, well, the government will first have to increase taxes on companies, which will then cause companies to try to increase their expenditures, which means that individuals who are trying to find work will then be forced to take lower wages because the government are going to offer lower wages because they know that their basic income, they have that basic income. So now you're going to have individuals that you used sweeping the floors who may work for next to nothing. So to me, it seems that if you're going to agree then at that point that they could negotiate for 50 cents an hour or $1 an hour or $10 a day or any price at all, and that's going to be valuable for, or that's going to be the value of their labor. To me, that seems to be minimizing the individual. You're going to have, and that's just something that the government needs to do, is that there are going to be certain individuals that the products of their labor are going to be valued at nothing, and they're still going to, or next to nothing, where they may work for, may work 8 hours and get $2 a day because they have their standard basic income. I mean, that seems to me just to be wrong on the face of it. So you have an increased taxes, and then you have people that are being told that the value of a day's work for you is $2, less than a cup of a Starbucks coffee. To me, that seems just an overall net bad. You're going to say, and you also said that the national union competitions are going to negotiate per business in order to meet the market demand. Well, if the market demand negotiates for a price that is below the cost of an individual to simply live, I mean, if to meet their basic needs, if the market is negotiating for a standard wage that is below what the individual needs to meet their needs, there's no way that the government can allow for these people to negotiate that. I mean, that seems odd that you can't negotiate somebody not to be able to meet their basic needs. So I'm going to pass it back. So I'll have about a minute and a half to close when you're done.
Sure. Okay, so let me talk about these two things. For UBI, no one's forced to do anything, right? I mean, you have enough money in order to buy food and to be able to pay for shelter and basic medical needs and things like that, right? So somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want you to, clean these floors and I'll give you 50 cents an hour. You can say, no, right? I don't want to. The only way that you would be cleaning floors for 50 cents an hour is if you said, yeah, that sounds good to me. I think that's fair, right? So you are empowered as an individual to choose what you think is a fair price for your labor. You can hold out. You say, well, look, I only want to get $80 an hour to sweep the floors. You're probably never going to get a job sweeping the floors, but you're still not going to starve, right? But you get to decide what kind of labor is worth it to you to do it, and then you make a voluntary agreement. That's how market economies are supposed to work. The problem with the way market economies work, and even the founders of market economies recognize that employers are at an advantage because employees are kind of under the gun. If I don't go do this job, I can't feed my family. But if you have a universal basic income, you don't need to worry about that. You're free to actually decide what is your time and interest worth to you, and to negotiate with employers on that basis. And the employers can offer wages at rates that they think people will find attractive. And if they do, then people will show up and work at those rates. And if they don't, people won't, and they'll have to change their rates in order to find the people to do the jobs they want to do. That's how markets are supposed to work. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way because of externalities and difficulties in the market. But the UBI solves those problems and ensures that nobody goes hungry, just because their talents are not worth what you set the minimum floor of a person who can make a living at. And that's a real problem with the minimum wage. You say this is the floor, and there are people who will not be able to meet that level of productivity, and they are completely out of luck, and you have no solution for them. That's a big problem. The national unions are not going to set a wage floor that is below a standard of living for the people. Those unions are there to represent the interests of the people who are members of that working class, and they get a vote, and it's a democratic institution. They get a say in the leadership, and if the leadership betrays them by choosing a wage that's unlivable, they're not going to support those unions. Many of the Northern European countries that have been very successful have very happy people, very high full employment and low levels of poverty, use this kind of system, and it is very effective in combining market forces with evening out the negotiating power of labor versus those. It does set a standard wage, but is not a standard minimum wage, is a standard reasonable rate of range for the type of work you do and the experience that you have. It's very fair and it's very equitable. I want to talk a little bit about the problems with minimum wage. You say that, why is a minimum bad? Well, here's the thing. If you set a minimum wage that is insufficient, say for somebody who lives in San Francisco, then that minimum wage is not useful for providing your goal of a standard of living that is attainable. If you set one that is high enough for San Francisco, then businesses that are in rural Missouri, which can't make the kind of profits that a high-tech industry can, won't be able to employ any.
All right, so in closing here, I'm just going to restate my lines of reasoning and their justifications. Okay, government should have a responsibility to ensure that an individual's labor is not undervalued. They have a responsibility to ensure that a population is fed, housed, and clothed, at the same time seeking to minimize the financial burden upon the state. Governments also should carry out their duty of protection, ensure that there is a population that is treated equally as possible, and that the population is never significantly devalued or valued at zero. If you agree with any of these measures, then you would agree with me that government should set a standard minimum wage, and you'll vote pro on this debate. In the last 43 seconds, I'm going to try to address the last comments that Sig made here. When you're talking about the universal basic income, he made the point that an individual could say simply, well, I'm not going to work for lower than a certain wage, say sweeping the floors. Well, then that's going to drive the companies to find an alternative, which is the automation, which he already said is another danger of the minimum wage. So basically, the UBI is going to increase the cost to the government, is going to keep people out of work, and is going to promote automation, which is the same argument that he had for why standard minimum wage doesn't work.
Under your the cost of the government is not really an issue particularly, right? Because we're interested in people being able to make a living and people being treated as worthy of their work. So if you work, you get a fair amount for a day's wages, right? And we want companies to pay a fair amount for the wages and the labor that they're getting. It should be an equitable exchange. That is the whole point of a market. And so we want to enable people to enter into those negotiations, both at the same and equal level. The employee does not have to work if they don't want to, and the employer doesn't have to employ anybody if they don't want to, and they can agree upon a reasonable and mutual price. Look, here's the problem with minimum wage. It's not the goals behind minimum wage. It is an awkward, ugly tool. It's like a big club that kind of half does what it wants to do, and it has hits a lot of things, does a lot of collateral damage on the side. We've covered what some of those are. It distorts market conditions, which leads to an economic disadvantage. It leaves some people who would normally want to work without any opportunity to work whatsoever by making basically their labor completely worthless. It sets a blanket standard in a world where economies are dynamic and changing and where different regions have different needs, and it doesn't account for any of that. So we've offered three alternatives that are better. We have a universal basic income, which ensures that nobody is at the strong negotiating work or die standard, and yet it allows for free market interaction. We have the national unions, which create a level playing field, but don't involve a blanket action and are much more customizable and able to deal with nuances of the economy. And if you're a free market person and you just don't think the government should be involved whatsoever, and you think the free markets will solve those problems, then you should vote based on that. So depending on what you think your goals are, you want to choose one of these three things. All of them are more accurate, more pointed, and more effective than the minimum wage.